Good evening, everybody. Tonight I wanted to discuss a concept with you all, and that is whether or not you should purchase tissue culture grown fruit trees. And this concept is going to surround mostly around figs and bananas, and I will explain why. With figs and bananas, as gardeners, we are used to the standard method of propagation. With a banana, you simply take a shovel and you break one of the pups off of the corm, and you repot it, and you get an exact clone of the mother banana. With a fig tree, you wait until dormancy, and you take a cutting of that mother tree, and you pot that up, and it will root in most cases, and you will get an exact genetic clone of that mother tree. And that is how these things have been propagated from generations and generations. And it's not just these trees that you can do that to. Most trees will root, and you can propagate them that way. So that is how gardeners over generations have taken the best tasting or the best producing or the most disease resistant things in their area, and they have spread that, and over the centuries and millennia we have propagated the best of everything, and we've come up with really sweet and really disease resistant things. Well, there is a new method that scientists can use to propagate things called tissue culturing. And I'm not an expert on this, but the layman's description of this is what they do is they basically take tissue of that plant. So they will cut a sample of that plant, and then they will sterilize it with chemicals, and they will grow a new exact genetic clone of that plant inside a petri dish. So at the end of the day, you will wind up with the exact genetic clone of the mother plant, whatever that would be. And there is a huge advantage to tissue culture propagation, and that is you are sterilizing that plant. So if you were to take a fig tree cutting off of a mother tree that had fig mosaic virus, and you were to propagate that, all of the offspring of that tree would have fig mosaic virus. And that is a problem with, say, black Madeira. Black Madeira is known to be infected with fig mosaic virus, so all of the strains are affected in various ways, and it hurts the plant. Well, if you tissue culture that, you will get a completely disease-free offspring that you can then propagate. So that is really awesome. And you can do this with any tree, with any plant. So you may be asking yourselves, well, why don't they do this with everything? Well, there's a downside to tissue culture propagation, and it's why most people have never heard of it. If you were to tissue culture a fruit tree, most fruit trees take a decade or more before they are mature enough to bear fruit. So this is why we buy grafted fruit trees. With a grafted fruit tree, you take a 10, 15, 20-year-old piece of fruiting wood off of a mother tree that's in its prime, and you graft that onto young rootstock. So you can have a tree that's ostensibly, a year or two old that thinks it's a 20-year-old tree because of the 20-year-old wood that grafts onto the young rootstock, and it will fruit immediately. So that's how we buy our citrus, that's how we buy our cherries, that's how we buy our apples. We take a disease-resistant rootstock that is hardy in our area, that customizes the tree to our zone, then we graft onto that fruiting wood, and we get a fruit tree that will bear for us within a year. If any of us had to go to the nursery and buy a fruit tree that wouldn't bear fruit in 10 years, none of us would do it. And that's the problem with a seed-grown fruit tree. If you plant an apple seed, an orange seed, an avocado seed, whatever seed, you're not going to get fruit off of that tree for 10 years or more. And the same thing would hold true with a tissue culture, because you're starting with a brand new cell. So you're not going to see the end user purchase very many tissue cultured fruit trees, because you're not going to get fruit for a decade or more, and nobody wants to buy that. So it's very rare for the end user to encounter a tissue culture. That's why most people don't know of it. It is different for figs and bananas, because figs and bananas grow so vigorously that generally you'll get fruit off of them within a growing season. So a fig cutting, if you start your fig cutting in the winter time and you have a long enough growing season that say at least 200 days or more, expect fruit off of that fig. Same thing would go with a tissue culture. Same thing holds true for a banana. If you break a pup off of the corm, you up-pot that pup, it's going to immediately go into a fruiting phase, and 18 months later you're going to have a bunch of bananas in most cases, as long as your climate is agreeable to a banana's fruiting cycle. So with bananas and figs, it is common for end users to purchase tissue cultures. And you get the best benefit because you can make exact copies of the plant's DNA, and you'll still get rapidly producing fruit. It doesn't know if it's a pup or if it's a tissue culture or a cutting. It fruits along a very rapid cycle. So these tissue cultures are not very controversial in the banana community because they're known to fruit very well. There's not many downsides to buying a tissue cultured plant. With figs, this is not the case. There is a little bit of a cloud that hangs over tissue cultured figs. They have a reputation for growing out very bushy-like in all directions and not in a neat, even upward growth habit as a standard cutting would. Cuttings tend to grow more orderly. And in my experience, this is true. But that's not really a downside because you can prune your figs accordingly. The real negative that people seem to place on tissue cultured figs is that people tend to believe that they have that they will not fruit for you readily. People tend to believe that it takes several seasons for a tissue cultured fig to bear fruit. And in my experience, that is just not the case. I have 3 tissue cultured figs and also 2 tissue cultured bananas, and I want to show you all of these plants. Last year I purchased 2 tissue cultured figs from Burpee. They were Violette de Bordeaux and Latarola Italian Honey, and I received them as very scraggly bushes that were about 4 to 6 inches high. I will link to that video above where I prune those bushes into a single stem growth habit. And I had an issue with the Latarola where something girdled it, some kind of bug attacked it and ate it. So I had to take cuttings off of that plant and repropagate it from the start all over again. So the first year only my Violette de Bordeaux tree grew. And I bought it very late in the season. I believe I bought it at the end of June, and by the time it put any size on it, it was too late for it to have an adequate growing season. But that tissue cultured Violette de Bordeaux did produce figs the very first season. They just produced too late, so I removed the figs and I cut it down into a little branch to try and grow a goblet form for this year. This year, the Violette de Bordeaux is on season number 2. The Latarola is ostensibly on its first season because I had to start it all over again from a cutting over the winter. And then I also went to Lowe's and I purchased a tissue culture Olympian fig tree back in April. And I want to take you and show you exactly what these trees look like now. This right here is my Violette de Bordeaux tree. I pruned this down to a single stem over its dormancy period this past winter. Like I said, it did fruit for me the first season, but it was too late because I purchased it too late. And I want to show you what kind of fruit set I have on this first real full season tree. Here is the 1 liter growing out of the goblet, and you can see this guy is just loaded with figs. In fact, some of them even appear to be double figs, like right here. And it's fruiting all along this branch. Here is another branch of this Violette de Bordeaux, just loaded with fruit. You can see them all over the place. Here's another liter, absolutely loaded with fruit. You can see how beautiful they look. And they're just everywhere. There must be well over 100 figs on this tree. It's really impressive. This right here is my Latarola Italian Honey. You can see this is branched out in all directions for me. And all of these different branches are full of fruit. You can see how large they are. And it's only July 2nd. and that's how big they are and how much fruit it's holding. That's the second liter. Here's the third liter. And again, only July 2nd. And here is the fourth liter, loaded with figs. So that's my first year Latarula, which is a cutting from a tissue culture that was only a few months old. Finally, here's my Olympian. I just purchased this from Lowe's in April. And look at this thing. It has huge figs on it. And it is very prolific to say the least. Here's the third liter. And here's the fourth liter. And again, all three of these trees were tissue cultured trees. The only tree that gave me any trouble with fruiting out of all of my fig trees is the raspberry latte, and this was cutting grown. Raspberry latte is notorious for being stingy, a very shy bearer the first few years, and I only had this one fig forming right here. And I recently made a video on how to pinch fig trees, and that included a follow-up to my raspberry latte and the effect of pinching. I'll link to both of them above, but after I pinched, it completely changed the habit of the fig tree, and right now it is setting figs all through the liters. There's even more on this liter. You can see them all setting on, and this happened because I pinched the fig tree. As soon as I pinched it, the entire dynamic of the tree changed. Its whole behavioral pattern shifted, and it moved away from leafy growth to growing figs. These right here are pups that are offsprings from a dwarf Orinoco tissue culture I purchased about 2 years ago, which I successfully fruited last October. I made a video on that, and I will link to that video above. But my dwarf Orinoco bananas fruited for me successfully, and they're already producing nice offspring. You can see how large they are. And this was another pup that I broke off. You'll see that this pup, which was an offspring of the mother tree that was a tissue culture, is also showing pups. And believe it or not, it even produced more pups for me, and I gave another one to my parents, so now they have a banana tree as well. This right here is a blood banana that I bought in May. It was just a little tiny single leaf, and you can see how large it is already in about 2 months. This was just a little tiny tissue culture, and it's doing great. So there's much less stigma with tissue cultures in the banana community than there are in the fig community. I just wanted to take this time and weigh in and give you my opinion on tissue cultures and whether or not they're good for growing figs and bananas. I have had nothing but tremendous success with tissue cultures. I have not had any issues with fruiting, quite the opposite. And with my own experimentation, I've proven to myself that whether it's a cutting or a tissue culture does not dictate how well the fig is going to perform. I can tell you that tissue cultures need a little bit more pruning, so I will tell you at the very beginning, try to cut off as many of the suckers as possible and pick the strongest leader to train that leader, because the suckers will sap energy from the rootstock. The more suckers you have, the less upward growth you're going to get, and the more side growth you're going to get. So prune them back to focus the energy, and I think you will have a lot of success with the tissue culture. The second thing you need to know is that you have to fertilize your figs adequately. I don't think most gardeners, especially container gardeners, fertilize their figs enough, because every single time you water your figs, you push the nutrients out of the container. They drain out. Figs need a considerable amount of phosphorus to fruit, so do not gyp your figs on phosphorus. So that's my advice to you. Don't be afraid of purchasing a tissue culture. Just make sure to prune the suckers and the side growth off. Make sure to fertilize adequately, and you'll get yourself a really nice tree that should still fruit for you the first season, and it will be guaranteed to be fig mosaic virus free. For the bananas, you'll get yourself a really cheap tree. Tissue cultures are generally much cheaper than cutting grown propagated figs and bananas because it takes a lot of space and a lot of work to propagate cuttings. It takes months to do so. It takes a lot of dirt. It takes large containers, and there's a high failure rate. There's a very high success rate with tissue cultures, and all you really just need is a petri dish. It takes a lot less effort, so you can get yourself a really affordable, disease-free tree with tissue cultures. Everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for future updates and more videos like these. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.